canto. Yesterday's class was given by Sanatana Govindadasa, and it is on the 11th chapter of the first canto, entitled Lord Krishna's Entrance into Dwarka. So, we're going to speak on text number 34. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Evam Nipanam Kshitipada Janmanam Akshohinibi Parivritritejasam Vidaya Vairam Svasano Yatanalam Mitovatain O Parato Nirayada. And this verse is speaking about the Lord. I'll just do the translation. The Lord was pacified after killing those kings who were burdensome to the earth. They were puffed up with their military strength, their horses, elephants, chariots, infantry, etc. He himself was not party in the fight. He simply created hostility between the powerful administrators, and they fought amongst themselves. He was like the wind which causes friction between bamboos and so sparks a fire. This is the purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. As stated above, the living beings are not factual enjoyers of things which are manifested as God's creation. The Lord is the genuine proprietor and enjoyer of everything manifested in His creation. Unfortunately, of course that makes you think of the verse, Bhaktaram yagatapasham sarvam lokam ahishvaram suridam sarvabhutanam gatvam shantam richati. Unfortunately, uninfluenced by the deluding energy, the living being becomes a false enjoyer under the dictation of the modes of nature. Puffed up by such a false sense of becoming God, the deluded living being increases his material strength by so many activities and thus becomes the burden of the earth, so much so that the earth becomes completely uninhabitable by the sane. The state of affairs is called dharmasya glani, or misuse of the energy of the human being. When such misuse of human energy is prominent, the saner living beings become perturbed by the awkward situation created by the vicious administrators, who are simply burdens of the earth, and the Lord appears by His internal potency just to save the saner section of humanity and to alleviate the burden due to the earthly administrators in different parts of the world. He does not favor either of the unwanted administrators, but by His potential power, He creates hostility between such unwanted administrators, as the air creates fire in the forest by friction of the bamboos. The fire in the forest takes place automatically by the force of the air, and similarly the hostility between different groups of politicians takes place by the unseen design of the Lord. The unwanted administrators, puffed up by false power and military strength, thus become engaged in fighting amongst themselves over ideological conflicts, and so exhaust themselves of all powers. The history of the world reflects this factual will of the Lord, and it will continue to be enacted until the living beings are attached to the service of the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, this fact is very vividly described in Bhagavad Gita 7:14. It is said, the deluding energy, Daivi yesha gunamayi mama maya durachaya mameva ye prapajante mayamitam terantite. This deluding energy is my potency, and thus it is not possible for the dependent living beings to supersede the strength of the material modes. But those who take shelter in me, the personality of Godhead Shri Krishna, can cross over the gigantic ocean of material energy. This means that no one can establish peace and prosperity in the world by fruitive activities or by speculative philosophy or ideology. The only way is to surrender unto the Supreme Lord and thus become free from the illusion of the deluding energy. Unfortunately, persons who are engaged in destructive work are unable to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are all fools of the first order. They are the lowest of the human species of life. They are robbed of their knowledge, although apparently they seem to be academically educated. They are all of the demoniac mentality, always challenging the supreme power of the Lord. Those who are very materialistic, always hankering after material power and strength, are undoubtedly fools of the first order because they have no information of the living entity. And being ignorant of that supreme spiritual science, they are absorbed in material science, which ends with the end of the material body. They are the lowest of human beings because the human life is especially meant for re-establishing the lost relation with the Lord. And they miss this opportunity by being engaged in material activities. They are robbed of their knowledge because even after prolonged speculation, they cannot reach to the stage of knowing the personality of Godhead, the summum bonum of everything. And all of them are men of demoniac principle, and they suffer the consequences, as did such materialistic heroes as Ravana, Hiranyakashipu, Kamsa, and others. Amagina timirandasya jana jana shalakaya chakshuran militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Vishtaya Bhutale Srimate Satsvaruptas Goswami Iti Namane Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatare Shatarine. By way of explanation, I am continuing on the Bhagavatam classes in the morning in Dublin. Yesterday, as I said, Sanatan Govindadwipa gave the class. I'm giving the class today. Mainly, the reason behind it is because a real spiritual organization, temple, is based on spiritual principles. It's not based on bricks and mortar. Bricks and mortar can be used to help a temple, all right, there, to set up a temple and be very useful. Papanchikataya Buddhas Haribandana Samman must Parityam Vairagam can't remember the actual verse. It's from Rupa Goswami, but he explains the content of it is that that material things can be used in the service of the spirit, and if you renounce those things, then you become falsely renounced. But it's called Yuktam Vairagam, which means utilizing material things in the service of spirit, and then they take on their spiritual potency again. So it was a bit long-winded. Sorry about that. But the reason is because the Bhagavatam going on is important in any spiritual structure. For instance, in the UK and France, Germany, so many places at the moment, the Bhagavatam has been spoken in the morning time and discussed by devotees. It's also going on Govindadwipa. But in Southern Ireland, around Dublin, it's not going on at the moment in a formal way. And I'm sure so many devotees are studying Bhagavatam, which is excellent, wonderful. But I personally have you could call it a kind of a mission in a sense, because when I actually joined the Krishna consciousness movement in Dublin, there was a program going on every day, and there was a temple in which there was a functioning spiritual program. Now, since then, that has stopped, but we've revived it in different ways. But the time is kind of getting ready now so that we can bring it back in full swing. There are many reasons to say why the actual functioning system didn't go on. This is Prabhupada's system of reading Bhagavatam and discussing it. There are many reasons why it didn't go on. But it's not really relevant to go into those reasons, but it's relevant to go into, in my opinion, to go back and start it again, and to have it constantly going on. So we're starting in a small way. There's 2 classes, Sanat and Govindadwipa, and myself giving the classes on Mondays and Tuesdays. And we're continuing on from the structure that's going on Govindadwipa, where it started probably 2 years ago, actually 2 to 3 years ago. We went back to the start and started to do the Bhagavatam again. So we're going to try to continue on that vein. And just use it as an opportunity to build the strength of Bhagavatam, because everything comes from Bhagavatam and the holy name. Those 2 things, Shravanam, Kirtanam. Hearing Bhagavatam and chanting the holy name, Shravanam, Kirtanam. So, so I'd like to speak about today's verse, basically. It's a highly significant verse, and Prabhupada is a pure devotee, and he came here on the planet in 1996 to 1977. But specifically his mission of preaching in the West happened from 1965 to 1977. And his insights into society and the world will be enlightening for the next 10,000 years. His insight here is particularly of interest because he talks about the quarrel among the non-devotees, and how instead of Krishna paritranaya salinam vinishaya chaduskritam, Krishna appears at different times when there is a rise of irreligion and where the practices of religion are being stopped. So what happens? Sometimes he appears himself, but on other occasions, like it's been mentioned here, Krishna just organizes among the non-devotees a quarrel in which they basically obliterate themselves. When Prabhupada was writing the Back to Godhead magazines in the 40s, he referred to this, and basically both in the First World War, he referred to the First World War, there was the fight mainly between the British and the French and the Germans. And both sides pretty much obliterated each other. You know, they were both left financially in pieces. Okay, the British and the French were a little bit better off, and they had these heavy constraints on the Germans, but basically sorry about that was a bit of a disruption. Sorry, it's going to come out in two parts now. I'm not sure why the alarm was set for 8 o'clock at that point. So the Germans and the English and French, whatever, they had this huge war in which so many people suffered, so many people died, so many people were. My grandfather fought on the side of the British. He was from Wales, and he was a cabinet maker, but his arm was blown off, and so he was very very difficult to be a cabinet maker with one arm, but he was still very expert. But it's very difficult to make a living that way. But anyway, so much suffering, and that's how the burden of the world is removed, was when people who are basically scoundrels trying to use the earth for their own benefit, the material nature becomes upset, and Krishna becomes upset and then tries to remove them from the face of the planet. So what we have there is a particular disease, a disease in humankind, or animal kind, you might say. But anyway, let's say call it humankind at the moment, whereby the human is trying to grab things for his own benefit. It's such a waste, it's such a disaster, it's such a horrific mentality. It's in all of us, this kind of acquisitiveness just for one's own so-called pleasure. But it is the lower side of it. It's not the soul, it's not the human being, it's not the real person. Because the real person is a servant of Krishna. That's our real nature. This Bhagavatam talks about Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Now let us inquire into the nature of the self. And there is a dearth of information about this. I went to college myself in Dublin in the late 70s, early 80s, and studying French, English, philosophy. Listened to a lot of very intelligent and enlightened speakers, some of them priests and so on. But the cutting edge of the Bhagavatam was somewhat missing. I went to a scriptural lessons with a Father Bill, I can't remember his second name. But he was eating his meat and sausages as we discussed things, and I was actually, I'm not criticizing anybody here, but I'm just saying there's a lack of real spiritual information about how to live one's life in a spiritual way. So there was another priest I was talking to. It was a kind of a Father Trendy, and he was just using excuses to eat meat and to quote from the Bible how it's okay to eat meat. But it was very obvious that you shouldn't kill animals. Thou shalt not kill. It's very obvious. And I actually knew it before I met the devotees. It was concretized when I met the devotees. But I'd given up eating meat. And of course now I'm at a different stage. I'm trying to get into the idea of protecting the cow. Something which is extremely horrific, you might say, in this life. My take on it is that I'm still drinking milk because of the wondrousness of the substance itself, but I'm trying to dedicate my life to protecting, to be involved in protecting animals. So that we can see how the cow is the most beautiful animal and should be protected. And the substance of the cow is the cow's love coming through Mother Earth is through the milk. So how can I take advantage of that if I don't try to protect the cows in some way? Which is the reason why we're trying to set up Dublin Eco Community. To protect the devotees and to protect the mothers up raising children, but also to protect Mother Earth and to protect Mother Cow as well. These are the reasons why we're doing this and trying to serve the Bhagavatam, chanting Hare Krishna. All of these things are all intertwined. So anyway, Prabhupada in the purport explains how this is disrupted, because you have rascals destroying the earth and grabbing animals and trying to eat them and put them in a factory and just completely destroy their own humanity and their merciless take on animals. I mean, they should be destroyed, not the animals. Well, let's put it this way: the mentality should be destroyed. So that's what Bhagavatam is doing. That's why we're reading Bhagavatam. This is why it's important that in every society Bhagavatam has been spoken. Because on the strength of Bhagavatam, because Krishna Svadoma Gate, that he's risen just after the departure of this Bhagavad Dharma is as brilliant as the sun, and has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who've lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in the age of Kali shall get light from this Purana, which is another reason why I'm trying to speak this, because there was no light when I was growing up as well, and I was engaging in nefarious activities and taking intoxication to try to get some enlightenment. But the Bhagavatam was actually here and I wasn't aware of it. Prabhupada was on the planet and I wasn't aware of it. So it's important to maintain this and develop this speech, this Shuddha Sattva speech beyond the modes of nature. Because we can get beyond the modes of nature. It's said in the purport, Daiviyeshit Gunmaya Mama Maya Daracha. I'll read it exactly rather than speculate away. My faulty memory in 7:14. So many beautiful verses in the 7th chapter. Daiviyesha gunamai mama maya duratya mamevya prajante mayam tarantite. This divine energy of mine, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. So that's been my experience, that if you surrender to Krishna, it is actually easy to cross beyond the modes of nature. I'm not for 1 minute saying that I'm not affected by the modes of material nature. I still am. But so this Bhagavatam is brilliant as the sun. When we repeat the Bhagavatam, we actually enter into the stage of beyond the modes of nature. And we hear about the history of the world, Lord Krishna's entrance into Dwarka, this incredible festive occasion. Krishna's returning to Dwarka. And it is, we can get beyond or get outside the pull of the modes of nature. And we can get into the stratosphere of the soul. The whole second chapter of Bhagavad Gita explains about the soul, about who we actually are. Because that information is actually missing in society, and it's part of the reason why there is so much conflict in the world, because of lack of understanding of our real nature. So the whole idea is to get some impetus so that more people will actually get a clue of what is actually happening, and then learn how to propagate Bhagavatam, learn how to put Bhagavatam into practice, and learn to chant the holy names of Krishna, which is the incarnation of God for the age. So that's such an important activity. According to Bhagavatam itself, it's the most important activity to incorporate in one's body and in one's mind, in one's heart, and in one's soul, the incarnation for the age, which is the chanting of the holy names. That's the activity for the ages. That's what so many different verses explaining what cannot be done which had been done in previous times, cannot be done now, but can be done in this age of Kali. Yogyai Sankirtana Paraya Yajanti Hi Sumedasa. It's foretold in the scripture that this time is particularly is prevalent. The chanting, it's a simple process. But here we see in the purport, Prabhupada talks about that there's so many of these kings, people who are in this demoniac mentality, have created a very dangerous situation in the world. And Prabhupada divides the two sections of society, calls it the saner section, people who are sane and those who are not, those who are trying to somehow or other imitate God or consider that they're God. So they take, instead of understanding the science of the self, they just talk about material science and what they can do with material science, and they can do things like this. They have this broadcast on Skype or on Facebook or whatever, but actually the spiritual dimension has much greater potency, because one's eternal. Like, for all the great medicines that they have, they can't see this face here. It's how it's getting older, and wrinkles appearing, and eventually this body won't exist any longer. And it's the fact with everybody in this world. But the nature of the soul is not like that. It's the nature of the soul is that it's inhabiting this particular body at the moment, and which is formed by one's karma, or how the soul has acted in previous bodies. It kind of subtly creates the next body. So this body will be gone fairly soon. But while we're here, while we're alive in these bodies, these souls, then we propagate the Bhagavad Gita. We give out this knowledge. We want people to take this knowledge. We want to take it ourselves, obviously, and then give it to others. And Prabhupada is giving us hints how to do it in this world. Here we have an interesting hint. He's explaining about the nature of Kali. So we shouldn't be surprised of the demonic mentality or the materialistic science which is used by people who don't understand that there's God, or have become covered. Let's look at that verse. Paritranaya sadhinam vinishaya chajuskritam. Sangstata partana sambhavami yuge. I'm not absolutely 100% sure where that is in the Bhagavatam at the moment. I'm sure it will come to me, but is it in the 6th chapter? No, it's not in the 6th. It's in the 4th, no. Yeah, Paracharnaya sadhanam vinishaya sujuskritam dharma sangsta panartaya sambhavami yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So this is kind of like a humble attempt, very humble attempt. To be participant in that is to re-establish the principles of religion, to re-establish the principles of the Bhagavatam. So the Bhagavatam is spoken at least somewhere in a formal way in the city or the environs of Dublin, the capital of Ireland. Of course, it should be going on in Cork, it should be going on in Waterford and Wexford, in Galway, Donegal, Sligo, everywhere. It should be going on. It's going on in Fermanagh. I think it's going on in Belfast. I'm not absolutely sure, but it should be going on because because we're giving testimony to Krishna, and we're trying to propagate this message. And some people are more expert than others at propagating, but still we should all propagate anyway, even if we're not so expert, because this will give delight to the heart. I mean, I have to say, there's nothing that's more wonderful than speaking on Bhagavatam. It's one of the real joys in life. And so again, just to get back, we're talking about this demonic mentality. The saint highlights the saner section. The state of affairs is called dharmasya glani, or misuse of the energy of the human being. You know, when such misuse of human energy is prominent, the senior living beings become perturbed by the awkward situation created by the vicious administrators who are simply burdens of the earth. And the Lord appears by his internal potency just to save the saner section of humanity and to alleviate the burden due to the earthly administrators in different parts of the world. Now, Prabhupada couldn't be more clear there. Now, how you apply that in your particular circumstance is totally up to you. I just accept that there's that's there. I don't get into the details of how they're demoniac and vaccines and without getting into buzzwords at the moment. I don't get into that so much because there is a tendency that you can be over absorbed in that, and rather than getting into the history of the Bhagavatam. I mean, Prabhupada is very clear. He gets into it very clearly, and I accept how he does get into it. And some other more qualified people than myself can get into it without getting wet, shall we say. And but my particular tendency is to call a spade when necessary. But Prabhupada, I think, says it in that particular sentence. You don't need to get into the details of it to know that it's going on. But the medicine for it is speaking from Bhagavatam, and the other medicine of it is chanting Hare Krishna. More medicine is in propagating it, is in distributing prasadam, is doing Harinam, or somehow or other sharing the spiritual world or the Bhagavatam with people. Because when you get absorbed in the histories of the spiritual world, these are the most important things that have happened on the planet. You have to understand this. In the three worlds, the most important. So therefore, these stories are the ones which should be studied, not some little situation that's happening in particular circumstances at a particular time in the 20th, 21st century, whatever. Because you can get too absorbed in these things. I'm not saying that you neglect them, because we can't neglect them because we're there, and we can use them in the service of the Spirit, but not to get overly absorbed in them and forget the wonderful activities that are there in the spiritual dimension. Here we have Krishna coming back from Dwarka to Dwarka. Previously had left Kurukshetra. The whole history of Bhishma Dev, the history of Queen Kunti, the son of Drona punished. Then we have the Maharaj Bharat, we have Maharaj Shantanu, we have what's that great devotee? Well, we have Maharaj Ambarish. We can hear about these devotees ad infinitum, and then if we want to go deeper, there's so many other. We have the 10th canto. We have all the activities of Krishna, the Krishna book, and we could get into that to whatever depth that we want, because life is very short here in this material world, and from what I understand, from my little small perch in the devotional ladder, is that there's some incredible states of consciousness to be had, but which can be blocked by over-absorption in this particular scenario that we're in. Again, we can use it in Krishna's service, and we have to live in this world, I understand, but not at the cost of the spiritual dimension, because Prabhupada said that, one pure devotee, Bhaktisiddhanta said the same thing, can liberate millions of people, Sometimes we have a tendency to think that we have to get stuck in the material world to change everything. Like the whole eco-village idea, we're doing that, we're not bothering about anybody else, we're just doing that as an example. People can come and see that as a way of living one's life. and can adapt that lifestyle. We're not commenting on what anybody else is doing. We're just doing what we have to do. And thankfully, in this particular situation or governmental status of demonic or not demonic, whatever you might call it, we have the liberty to do that. So let's do it while we can. There are other places you won't be able to do that. The demoniac situation is worse. Like the whole situation is, suffused with faithlessness. So whatever flavor or brand of demoniac rulership is there, you just have to get on with it and deal with it, But Bhagavatam is there. And there's so many occasions Prabhupada said that we can influence society, and that's what he wanted to do. The devotee is paradukha dukhi. He wants to help the suffering humanity. So like in our way, we have to perform in our way, and Prabhupada says we can cooperate, we can get on with each other, and we can try to work and work to our strengths, and work together to our strengths, and continue with this activity or with these activities of Krishna consciousness. So, again, just to summarize, I won't go on in much longer, but to summarize, the Prabhupada is talking about and in the purport it's about the kings Krishna came to remove those kings. So when Prabhupada went on and explained it in First World War, Second World War, Krishna often sets up a situation where people go against each other, and that's how the burden of the world is removed. And then there's some peace for the saner section of humanity then subsequently. And one can establish peace and prosperity in the world by fruit of activities, not by fruit of activities or philosophical speculation, but by surrendering to Krishna. And people are unable to surrender, Prabhupada says, and that's a demonic mentality is always challenging the Supreme. They're always hankering for material power and strength, but Prabhupada calls them the fools of the first order. They absorb the material science, and that they're lowest of mankind. They're robbed of their knowledge, and they suffer the consequences. So Prabhupada basically wanted us to provide an alternative lifestyle for the living entity. Peace, harmony, Krishna consciousness. Highly recommended. Okay, Hare Krishna.